Teaching text today is Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and knowledge, if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. When the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. You can be seated.
Well, good morning. It's good to be with you this morning. For those of you who may not met, my name is David Black. I'm the campus pastor here, and just want to say welcome to you. If this is your first time at Grace, something we say here and mean is that when it comes to this culture and the world in which we live, we're often talking about, let me set my table up real quick. We're often talking about and being told to get what we deserve. And so oftentimes, whether that be our friends, the internet, people that we're trying to endorse or not endorse, they're saying, hey, you deserve something, you should get what you deserve. The good news of Jesus actually says that God has given us what we don't deserve. And so if you're exploring Jesus, we know there's a lot of questions that often come with that, and so we're just happy that you would include us in that conversation. Hopefully you find a group of people to do that with. If you are a follower of Jesus, it's our hope and our heart this morning that you would hear from him as we keep going. And just a real quick aside before I go any further, if you are a part of Grace, or if you've just paid any attention to maybe the sign as you saw going by on the street as maybe you were checking us out, last night we had a fall festival, and Matt said it this morning in his opening already, but I just want to say thank you so much to those of you who took time, whether you had a trunk or worked a game or moved hay bales or whatever it was that you did, help roll up a bounce house for the 100th time. Thank you so much for making that a priority. Thank you for participating. We had over 150 people come through last night, and just to be able to say you're seen, you're welcome here, and share the love of Jesus is a great thing that we want to do for our community. So again, thank you for that, and if you served last night and you're here this morning, thank you for that too. I know it's a lot on a weekend. We're in the middle of a series just entitled Love Is. And so we're about halfway through. And one of the things that we do here is we open up this book. We call it God's Heart. We see what his heart has to say about our heart. And we've been doing that in one chapter, for which Laura read this morning, and then it's been read every other week. It's chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians. And in this series, when we talk about love, we just have to recognize that each of us comes to the table with an understanding of what love is. In fact, our culture loves to talk about love. We are a culture that is obsessed with love. We think it's important. We think it's the bottom line. We talk about it when we talk about technology and dating apps. We talk about it when we sing different songs, whether it be on the radio or go to a concert. We read about it, and we often see it in movies portrayed in certain lights and filters and things like that. And we all have a concept of love. We like it, we think we need it, which begs the question, if it's so important culturally to us, and if we would all say that love is something that we should have, why is it that it's often missing? Why is it that love is often missing from our families? Why is it missing from our work environments? Why is it missing from our neighborhoods, our communities? And why is it missing oftentimes even inside the church? And so we talked about a whole host of reasons. And one of the reasons we think that this is possibly the case is because when it comes to love, it can be hard to arrive at a definition. It can be confusing. In fact, for most of us, when we grow up, maybe this is your idea of love. The idea of love is somehow butterflies in the stomach, right? Anybody thought about that? Like, oh, love is when I kind of feel nauseous around people. We've learned that's just anxiety, right? That's just social anxiety. Some of you are like, I love everybody. No, we're just anxious people. That's what we are, right? But this idea that love is a feeling. In fact, one of my favorite quotes, not the one that I'm about to show you, but one of the favorite quotes that I heard this week, and maybe you've heard this too, is, hey, love is when I feel sick, and I want to marry the person who makes me feel the sickest, right? But what's often being expressed in that idea is this quote right here, that love is not a feeling you feel when you're feeling you'll feel a feeling you've never felt before, right? Think about that for a second. I love it because it's like, oh yeah, hey, I think I might feel something that I've never felt before from this person. And if I think I might feel that thing from this next potential person or this interest or this individual, that for many of us is what love is. We all have different definitions of love. Sometimes they're handed to us by family. Sometimes they're given to us by culture. Sometimes they're formed by what we've encountered that we know it's not. But one thing that's helpful, and the thing that we've been talking about a lot, is that when you look at the Bible, the language that many of the early letters and the New Testament is written in is Greek. And in the Greek language, it's a very expressive language, and they have 4 words for love. We won't go through them all this morning. But they had 4 words for love. And the most common word for love that they utilized was eros. It's kind of that butterfly feeling. It's the passion. It's the romance. And for most of the history of the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire, the primary word across all disciplines and all writings, and this is not a Bible fact, this is a history fact, you can go back and look, the number 1 word for love that was utilized was the word eros. This romantic love. It was the number 1 love that was talked about, that was sung about, that was dreamed about, that was written about, that was longed for. And then something interesting happened. Right around AD 50, the number 1 word used in the entire Roman world for love switched to a word that they had but they didn't use often. And that word was agape. And the word agape came to mean, love came to mean this definition, a commitment that ascribes worth to someone else at the cost of oneself. And all throughout the Greek language, here's what you find out. Suddenly the songs that people were singing and the things that they were writing and the things that they were talking about, the love that they were talking about changed. You say, well, why did that change? Well, it happened because there's this little tiny group of people called Christians. And this one individual figure named Jesus. And here's what you might be thinking. Here's what I've often thought as a pastor. That as a culture, I think the way that we primarily talk about love is kind of like romantic love. And I think it's what we obsess about. And I'm just asking myself, could this be the opportunity in our world and in our nation and maybe even in our community, in our town, and in our church, where we, as followers of Jesus, if you are a follower of Jesus, and not all of us have to be followers of Jesus to come here, I recognize that. But if you do follow Jesus, could it be an opportune moment that the church might actually be able to lean into our community? And could it be that for some people who encounter Jesus and his followers, the definition of love may actually change to this for the first time in their life? We've been asking this question the entire series, and I think it's a healthy and a hopeful one, and it's this. Is there a love better than this? Better than what? Better than the one we sing about culturally? Better than the one that we maybe have been longed for, or better than the one that we've been taught? Is there a love beyond this? And in 1 Corinthians 13, a guy named Paul is writing to a church that's impressive on the outside, but hollow on the inside. And they're bickering and they're arguing. I know churches don't do that, right? But they are pretend, right? Pretend you've seen a church that fights. And they're fighting and they're arguing. And Paul writes to them and goes, you know what your problem is? The number one problem that you have is that you lack love. And he begins to unpack a verse that is or a chapter that's often read at weddings. If you're not a follower of Jesus, it'll sound familiar to you. In fact, we just heard it read, right? Like, oh yeah, it's not a Hallmark card. It's literally Paul going, this is what it means to love someone at cost of yourself. This is the type of love that God is and that he offers to you and to me. And so today, we actually are going to continue this in one simple sentence that is all we'll have time for today. It keeps, talking about love, keeps no record of wrongs. I realize that this may not necessarily be relevant to all of us in the room, right? It's only relevant if someone's irritated you, angered you, disappointed you, hurt you, annoyed you, or bothered you, right? So pretty much all of us, right, at some point. And if not, if that's not you, if you're walking in and you're going, no, I feel great, I'd encourage you to lean in, because at some point, I'm just going to guess, at some point, you may need what we're talking about. I was thinking about the fact that love keeps no record of wrongs. I thought about a guy who broke a lot of records. In fact, maybe you've heard his story. I brought a picture. His name, I guess it's not his real name unless he's legally changed it, is the Iron Cowboy. I don't know who calls himself the Iron Cowboy, but this guy does, right? He self-appointed himself the Iron Cowboy. He first became popular and well-known because he set out to do 50 Ironmans in 50 states in 50 days. Do you know what an Ironman is? That's the run, that's like a triathlon on steroids, right? Run, bike, swim on steroids. So he's like, I'm going to do 50 of them, and if that's not enough, I'm going to do 50 different states, and I'm going to give myself 50 days. And do you know what? He did it and lived, right? That's even more impressive. After that, he decided that wasn't enough. So he said, can I do 100 Ironmans consecutively in 100 days? And he did that. He actually did 101. That's stupid. That's crazy, right? Like, I don't care who you are, though. You kind of have to go, well done, right? Well done. Like the limits that he was willing to persevere and to push himself through physically, you're like, I didn't even think that was possible. In fact, most of us we'd die. Like, I would die. We'd do 2, barely, maybe 1. Half of 1. I'm not even sure, right? Like, given on the day, like, if you are holding my children hostage, I could probably do 2, right? But beyond that, sorry, guys, that's it. Sorry, here. Right? We look at that and we go, oh my goodness, the perseverance and the determination that would take. And I just think, like, when it comes to a culture, culturally, we are really great at applauding physical perseverance. People who persevere physically. And it always makes me wonder, man, for a culture that values perseverance physically, why is it that we are so quick to give up relationally? Why is it that the minute someone offends us, we go, you get unfriended? Why is it the minute that something goes wrong, we're like, nope, I'm out? Like, why do we do that? What Paul is aiming at is this, that love, agape love, the kind of outside love that comes into this world, the love that's not the butterfly feeling love, the love that God defines for us. Agape love is this. Love is forgiving. it's forgiving. Now, as soon as I say forgiving, I recognize that it's a loaded word, right? I understand that you came to church this morning or to this gathering this morning. You didn't get to pick the topic, and so maybe that's a little unfair for you this morning. Let me just clarify something for you if you're coming in and you're going, forgiveness, man, that's a large topic. It is. Okay, when we talk about forgiveness, the Bible does not mean forget. It's not what it means. In fact, as we'll cover this a little bit later, but as humans, I don't think we can forget, right? It doesn't mean that consequences aren't real. Forgiveness does not mean I trust somebody and, man, you get an all-access pass into my life. Forgiveness does not also mean that if I am enduring abuse, physically, verbal, emotional abuse, that I should just suck it up and bear it. That's not what the Bible talks about. In fact, if you're here and you're actually going through abuse, you should tell someone before you leave today, right? It doesn't mean that I forget. It doesn't mean that the pain goes away. It doesn't mean that someone gets a free pass and there's no consequences. You might say, okay, well then if it doesn't mean all that, then why are we talking about that? Because most of the time when we say things in culture, it has to do with all those things. Well, I think it's because of this, because when you look at forgiveness, here's what the Bible says, that love is linked closely to forgiveness. In fact, Jesus was talking once about a lady who had done some socially atrocious things. And she was interacting with him and lovingly giving him a gift, and the people that were around him were disgusted by her. And Jesus looked at the crowd, and he looked at her, and here's what he said. He said, I tell you, her sins, and they are many, right, have been forgiven. So she has shown me much love. And then he says this, but a person who is forgiven little shows only little love. What's he saying? Well, he's saying a whole host of things, but I want you to see that even Jesus, when he's encountered by somebody who has been forgiven a lot, makes it a point to point out to people that the degree to which they love is somehow tied to their understanding of their degree to which they themselves have been forgiven. You see, here's what I think God has for us today, regardless of what you're navigating and what it is you're coming in with and what you're going to walk out with. Here's what I think this is important. I think what forgiveness does when it comes to love, forgiveness forces us into the deep end of the pool. I think it pushes us. It pushes us into the deep end of the pool of what we call love. And for many of us, that scares us because we're afraid. I think one of the reasons we're afraid is because growing up here, when it comes to this topic, we can't swim. Maybe we never learned to swim. So what I'm not saying today is that we're going to answer all your questions on forgiveness, but what I am saying is maybe we could take a beginner class on swimming in the deep end of the pool. Because when Paul writes and says love is forgiving, right, that it keeps no record of wrong, here's what he's acknowledging, and I think we could all start here and acknowledge this safely. Okay, if we're going to put our toe into the water of the pool, I think we could say this, that when he says this, he's recognizing that we have a natural tendency to keep score. When it comes to love and when it comes to relationships, we have a natural tendency to keep accounts. In fact, the word that Paul uses here is an accounting term. It's borrowed from the IRS and put into the Bible. And you're like, that's never good, right? But it's what he does. He's like, it's the word that people would use for keeping a ledger in business. It says, when it comes to love, it doesn't do that. And we all have a tendency to do that, don't we? I think one of the easiest ways and perhaps most comical ways, just to start off with, where it shows up in our life, is baby names, right? If you're trying to just choose a baby name, or if your friends are trying to navigate and choose a baby name, there's people in your life that you're like, we're not naming our kid that, right? No dad's like, how about Judas? And people are like, yeah, that sounds like a great name, right? Cain. I don't think there's a baby I've met named Cain. If you're here and you're named Cain, I'm sorry, but I would question your parents' love for you. The whole idea, like many of us would go, hey, there's a boyfriend or a girlfriend or someone in our past that when we have a baby name, we're not naming them that, right? We're not doing that. Maybe it was a teacher that we didn't like or somebody, we're like, nope. That's one way it shows up. Another way it shows up, I think, is when we fight. Because some of us, when we fight, get hysterical. Others of us get historical, right? So some of us get loud and passionate, and others of us just read a list, okay? You want to fight? Monday, 5 years ago. It was raining outside. You didn't take the trash in. You said you would, right? We get historical. We start reading the list and the ledger. In fact, many of us, the reason that we keep accounts with individuals is because we might need them, right? It might become useful to us when it actually comes down. The Bible would recognize that when it comes to life, we all have receipts, just receipts that we could pull out and begin to read. Growing up in college, I lived with some guys off campus, and after a little while, it became apparent that we needed to keep a record of who was paying the bills, right? That just didn't happen magically with roommates. Maybe it doesn't happen that way at your house. Our way of solving that, this is before Venmo and technology. It was the dark ages, okay? So we had a whiteboard on the fridge. That's what we did. And what we did on the whiteboard was we literally just wrote our names out. And anytime we went out to eat and someone picked up the tab, or anytime we had a gas bill or electric bill or a water bill, we would just write the totals that people owed underneath the names. What Paul is saying, what the Bible's recognizing, is that all of us do that with people. We have names in our life that have a certain amount of relational capital. And as we interact with them, we might have a good experience, and we go, +2, right? And then as I interact with someone else, I might have a bad experience, -10, -5. And we all have a relational capital, and what happens is when someone begins to interact with us in a way that demands more capital or credit than they have on their account, what do? We go, I can't believe you asking that of me. After what? And then we read the debt. After all this, now you want this? You don't have enough. That's what we do. And for some of us, it takes one big thing to just cancel out that whole credit that person built up. One big thing, one wrong word, right? For many of us, it's the other way around. It's a lot of little things. A lot of little things that we add up on the ledger and all of that. What Paul is saying is this, that when it comes to relationships, we have a tendency to allow the score of someone else's life and account to determine the degree to which we love them. And he goes, no. Real love is the opposite. Real love actually says it's the love for the person that determines how I keep score or if I do at all. In fact, what he's recognizing here is that it's hard to forgive and let go of things in people's lives if you're still counting. Forgiveness is very difficult as long as you're still counting. And for many of us, the struggle that we have with others is we still count as we're trying to forgive. And we're going, hey, forgiveness, I'm trying over here, but I'm also you're stacking up a lot of debt over here. And it's going back and forth. In fact, one of Jesus' followers, who normally gets things wrong, kind of gets it right a little bit. When, at least about who you and I are. I'm glad he asked this question. His name was Peter, and he came to Jesus and he said, hey, Jesus, how often should I forgive my brother when he offends me? Now, what kind of questions is he asking? He's asking a math question. He's asking an accounting question. He's going, what's the limit? How often, what's the credit in your world, in your kingdom, Jesus, in the world that you would have and the way that you want things to be? If my brother offends me, how much credit do I give them before I go, I'm cutting you off? Is it, and he goes, 7 times, right? Now, in Aramaic, and 7's kind of a word for completion, so some people think he said that. I think he just said it because that's one for every day of the week, right? So if someone offends me Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, do I still have to keep going, Jesus? And Jesus looks at him and he goes, no. I say not to you 7 times, but 77 times, or 70 times 7. Like, wow, that's a lot. Right? So I think we would just recognize by what Jesus is saying here, first of all, is that he's saying that seems to be no limit. But I think he's saying something a little bit more. And you don't have to remember all of this, but if you could just for a second, just jump into the weeds back in the Old Testament for 1 minute. with me, and then we'll come back up for air. Okay, back in the Old Testament, there's a guy named Cain. I mentioned him earlier. He killed his brother Abel. It's the first murder we have in the Bible. And he killed his brother Abel because he was jealous with him and because his anger got the better of him. And God gives us the lineage of Cain, his kids. And the reason that the Old Testament gives us his kids' lineage is because what they want to show us is that the pattern of anger and revenge in Cain begins to play itself out over time in his family. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And there's this dude named Lamech. And Lamech was the first polygamist in the Old Testament that we have. And he's bragging to his wives. And he says this. He's basically like, hey, said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Some of you ladies know that sometimes your husband just goes like, hey, do you know what happened to me today? Or, hey, I just need to tell you something. And you're like, who are you talking to, right? Like, and hey, listen to what I have to say. I killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. And then he says this, if Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. See what he's saying? He's saying if Cain's revenge on his brother Abel was this way, sevenfold, mine is 77 times that more. In other words, he's going, the way that Cain lived and the way that he got revenge, right? That's how I'm going to live my life to the extreme. There's a pattern there. And I think Jesus, when he's answering Peter, actually has this in mind. I think that when he looks at Peter, he goes, you know what? You remember that family in the Old Testament that had a pattern of revenge to the fullest extent? Here's what he thinks. I think Jesus is going, I think he's looking at Peter and going, in my family, here's what we have. We have a pattern of not keeping a record of wrong. So here's what this means. Forgiveness is not just a point in time. It's a way of life for the people of God. That's actually good news. That means that you don't wake up one day and just go, oh, it's a decision, done, dealt with. It's an ongoing, continual habit that we have to have. Like if you're sitting around and you're expecting to one day wake up and forgive whatever happened in your life, and then roll on like nothing, that's not how it works. It's not how it works. It's not a magic wand. It is something that you have to continually apply over and over and over and over again. I think this is so crucial that we get this first point. Because here's what I think we tend to believe. I think we tend to believe like, okay, yeah, I know that. But the way that I navigate that, and this is just me, and I think maybe it's you too, because I tend to think I'm just a normal person most of the days. I think the way that we think and operate, and the way that I think and operate is like, oh, well, if I don't hang out with people who are going to hurt me or offend me, then I won't have to do a lot of forgiveness. And so I'll just navigate life by going like, well, if they're starting to push the limit, I'm going to go and spend time over here with these people. Which, to be honest, leaving a fight is not, or avoiding a fight is sometimes a good habit. Like, I don't want to be confrontational. But for most of us, here's what we're forgetting and here's what we're overlooking. And here's why I think that Paul includes that love keeps no record of wrong in this list. Aside from the fact that that's what love does, it's because love actually necessitates this by nature of what it is. Let me say that differently. The people who you love most have the most potential to hurt you the most. So the minute that you begin to love someone, the minute you begin to become vulnerable to their offense to you. And the reason this is necessary for us to understand, and the reason that he says love keeps no account, because it realizes that we begin to navigate deep waters of vulnerability with one another. And that as our hearts begin to get tied to somebody else, what's going to happen is that person is going to be able to wound me and hurt me the most, more than I had ever thought. And so we start off relationships going, man, I really love this person. I really love this person. And we go, ouch, that hurts. Why does that hurt so bad? And we go, I'm going to add that to the list, right? And if you do that, what he's saying is things begin to break down. Now, there's 100 things I would rather have happen in a relationship than forgive somebody, just as a person, right? And we all tend to do them. And so sometimes when we love someone really deeply and we think that they could hurt us the most, when they say something that offends us, and maybe I won't admittedly say I'm putting it on their account, but maybe I'll just act tough. And so some of us will deny it, and we'll be like, it's not a big deal, but it really is a big deal. And we really have just put something on the list in our heart. And the difficulty is that when I begin to deny it, I begin to put a wall up in my life, and I begin to keep out the very thing that I desire, which is to be known and vulnerable and to have intimacy with somebody else at that level. And so the more I deny it, the more I deaden my heart to real love. For some of us, it's not that we act tough. For other of us, we just even the score. And so the way that we handle not keeping accounts is we're like, well, if you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. And therefore, we're even. So I don't keep accounts, except we are, right? So what I need to do is constantly be thinking about, okay, do you owe me or do I owe you a jab this week, right? Is it like, or hey, I'm hurting you equally the way that you hurt me, and we call that dysfunctional, but that's okay. We don't always name it that, but maybe you grew up in a family where you didn't, quote unquote, keep accounts, you just got even, and it's just been a perpetual thing of being even, and you're like, my scorecard's clean. It's really not, but it's just even. And what happens when we do that, when we actually begin to try to just simply get even, it can control our relationships. It begins to control us. It begins to determine how I respond to somebody. Because we simply just reference the card, and if I need to get even, then that tells me how I'm going to behave. For others of us, we don't deny it. Others of us, we don't try to get even. Or others of us, we just carry it around. We just carry it around. And we don't say, hey, I'm keeping score so that I can get even. We just simply say, I'm just going to carry that. I'm going to absorb that. Maybe it's my quote-unquote role in the family, or the role in the relationship, or the role in my community, that I absorb the offense and I put it in a backpack. The problem is that begins to corrode our relationships. It begins to break things down in our hearts. And so if denying it is going to make me have more of a deadened heart, and if keeping it even helps me control, then carrying it around begins to contaminate all of my relationships, and I get bitter and I get angry. And I don't know what else to do with it. Here's the plain difficulty. I think why Paul is telling the church this. Because if keeping score matters most, or if keeping accounts matters the most, it actually leads to us missing out on what we need the most. And that's sacrificial love. In fact, C.S. Lewis puts it this way, talking about your heart: wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all the entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But it will change. It will not be broken, talking about your heart. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. There is no safe investment. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. He continues. Oh, I read the second half. Is that it? Just one? Is there two? Okay. He's basically getting at the point that if you choose to not love anything, it doesn't help. If you simply solve the forgiveness and the account thing by not involving yourself in a relationship, it just won't help. It gets hard. It gets alone. I think when we talk about this with Jesus, and when we allow him to even just talk to Peter and then extrapolate to our life, I think here's what we find, and even what Paul's saying here when he says love keeps no record of account or keeps no record of wrong. No matter where we draw the line with Jesus, right, here's what we find out: it's not far enough. Jesus just continually pushes the boundaries of what we think forgiveness looks like. We go, oh, maybe it's this. And he goes, no, it's further than that. It's a lifestyle of it. And what we have to recognize, and what Jesus is trying to get Peter to recognize, is this: that when it comes to forgiveness, we are too poor. You say, well, what do you mean? Well, in Matthew 18, Jesus tells a story to Peter to help him understand. And I think it's helpful for you and I. And so we're not going to read the whole story. I'll tell it to you quickly, and then we'll look at a couple specific verses. But Jesus unpacks this story to Peter, and he says there's a man who owed a king an insurmountable amount of money. In fact, he uses the highest number in their language, 10,000, with the highest currency in their language, a talent. So he owed this man 10,000 talents, which is 40 years' wages, right? So whatever, take the national average of a wage in the United States, multiply it times 40, that's what he owed this king. But it's really his way of saying like a gazillion billion dollars. So Jesus is saying there's a man who owed a king a gazillion bazillion dollars, and he went to that king, and here's what he did. He fell down on his face, and he said, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything." So he's asking for patience, not forgiveness. He's asking for patience, and he's like, I'll do my best. I don't know how, but I'm going to pay back a gazillion billion dollars. I don't know how that's going to work legally, right? And he goes, and out of what? Pity, the word there's compassion for him, the master of that servant said, yeah, I'll have patience with you. No, he doesn't say it. He actually releases him and forgave the debt. Like, that's incredible. Can you imagine owing a gazillion billion dollars? Can you imagine owing 40 years' wages and someone coming along and going, you know what? I have compassion for you. I've been moved with mercy for you. You don't owe me a thing. So he leaves. And after he leaves, he finds a fellow servant. A fellow servant, and Jesus tells the story this way, that he owes him about $17. And he grabs the servant by the throat, and he shakes him, and he literally says to him, pay back what you owe me. And in the words of Jesus in the parable, he actually uses almost the same words of what the servant said. Right here, he says this. Just click it once. Yep. So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him. And look at what he asks. Look at what the servant, his fellow servant, asks of the man. Same words. Have patience with me, and I will pay you. He refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. And what Jesus said is the king found out. And the king threw that servant who was forgiven much and yet refused to forgive others into prison. What's he recognizing? Well, I think first in that story, Jesus is trying to help us understand that when it comes to forgiveness relationally, we are very, very poor. And what I mean by that is that we all have the same problem of these two servants. First is this. One, we owe. If we went around the room, which we won't do, thankfully, right? That's a different church. If we went around the room and said, hey, what do you owe to God and to other people that you've relationally done wrong that you could never hope repay? There are things. Like, we all have things in our life that when we really think about, there are wrongs that we have committed relationally against others, intentionally or unintentionally. The same way when it comes to God, where if we had our whole life, we could never repay or repair that relationship. We have them. We all owe in some form or fashion. But not only do we all owe, we also have the same problem is this: we won't let go. And you say there are people in our life who owe us relationally, and we will not let go of that thing or that. And the reason that we will not let go and the reason that we owe are the same, and that's this: we're poor. Because someone has to pay. Someone has to pay. That's the reality. In a relationship, when it comes to forgiveness, someone has to pay. Who paid for the debt that the man owed for the king? The king did. Right? You have to understand, we get this. Like, if you walk into a store, oftentimes you'll find a sign that says this: beware, you break it, what? You bought it. Right, you buy it. Why? What's the store trying to get across? That if you break it, you're going to pay. Because they also would have to pay. In other words, if you walk into a store and you break a lamp or something of value, and they look at you and they say, it's okay, don't worry about it, it's not just them going like, what did they have to do? They have to pay for it. It's on their account. It costs them. And so when it comes to forgiveness, it's not somebody just going, it's no big deal, don't worry about it. It's actually the fact that the other person, someone has to do that. Who has to pay for it? If you come to my house and you break a lamp in my house and I say, it's fine, who has to pay? Me, if I want to replace that. And we recognize this fact. In fact, we recognize that forgiveness is costly. Because if it's not costly, and here's a clue, if it's not costly, it's not forgiveness. It's something else. In fact, we often think about forgiveness in a very cheap way in our culture. We talk about it as if it's just someone going like, it's not a big deal. And if you've been harmed or hurt, you know it is a big deal. And the fact that someone looks at you and goes, oh, no, it's just a cheap thing. You go, no, it is a very expensive thing. You recognize that. In fact, talking about this, after the 2015 shooting in Charleston, one of the aunts of the victim spoke this way about it. To insist upon a narrative of forgiveness is dehumanizing and violent, and it goes against the very nature of lament. What is she talking about? She was saying that people were quick to jump to talk about forgiveness without recognizing the cost at which that forgiveness comes. So for the entire nation to suddenly just begin like, oh, forgiveness, is to fail to recognize that there is actually a real cost here. And so because forgiveness is costly, right, by nature, we must recognize that. It is not something you go down to the dollar store and buy. That's why if someone talks to you about, just forgive, it's no big deal, they are not being honest about what true forgiveness is. The Bible does not talk about cheap forgiveness, ever. Never does. The Bible always talks about costly forgiveness. And here's why. Here's why we can't forgive, because it is costly. The reason you and I struggle to forgive is precisely because we recognize that real forgiveness is costly. We realize that someone has to pay. And if you be honest with yourself when it comes to the accounts in your relationships, what you're doing is you're looking at someone else and saying, you owe me because I'm so hurt, I can't afford that. Relationally, I don't know what to do with that thing that's broken. It costs so much. I'm too poor. I can't make that up, so you have to. And so person in front of me who's driving super slow under the speed limit when it's clearly posted that it's higher, you owe me because I'm late for school and for work. You owe me. You're paying. Person who keeps tapping incessantly and I can't focus, you owe me. Because I'm trying to concentrate and you're interrupting it and you don't see how you owe me for that. Or perhaps more specifically and more real, right? Mom or dad, you owe me because in my life while I was growing up, you were not there. And I had to parent myself. I had to figure this out myself. So you owe me because I was a kid and there's no way I can afford to pay for that even as an adult. So you pay for that. Right? That's what we do. We constantly look at other people and we say, you owe me, because we are too poor. We can't afford it. Right? That's why when it comes to trust, we're going, are you saying that I have to trust? No, I'm not saying you have to trust. Forgiveness is not about easing pain. There's still pain. Forgiveness is not, again, about enduring something or just canceling, forgetting about it. Forgiveness is pretty much simply looking at the other person and saying this, that I can't pay, and I recognize that you can't pay either. Right? So I have to have someone to pay. Right? Forgiveness is canceling a debt. It's going, I am not going to hold you to the debt that you owe me legitimately. I'm recognizing the cost, but I'm not going to make you pay it. That's serious, right? In fact, what forgiveness does is the reason we don't like it, and the reason it's so hard to talk about, is because forgiveness forces me to recognize my own spiritual poverty. In fact, Jesus put it this way, twice in two different ways. Once in Matthew and once in Mark. It is actually, he says this, whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. He's going like, look, if you're saying and you're standing and praying, he's like, I want you to forgive other people because you recognize that you are also poor. And over here, he says something which is crazy. He says, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. Jesus, what are you doing? It's almost like he's trying to poke at the pain. Like, that's too costly. You want me to do that? And basically what we're asking is this: who's going to pay? Who's going to pay for it? And what Paul is trying to say, and what Jesus is trying to say, and what the story of the New Testament says is this, is that real love is rich. Not that you are rich, not that I am rich, but love in and of itself, by definition, the love that God has, the love that comes outside into this world, that type of love is rich. And because it is rich, it can afford not to keep accounts. Look at when it comes to the king. What does the king say? The king says to the servant, when he's called in front of him, before he throws him in prison, he says, and should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant, what? As I had mercy on you? He's saying, how about you borrow the mercy that I had on you and charge his $17 credit to my mercy that I gave you? He's not looking at the guy and going, hey, I understand you're poor. Why are you making this guy charge? He's going, why didn't you take the mercy that I gave you on your account and withdraw from that and extend it to him? He's like, I know you're poor. You've proven that you're poor. Right? You're too poor, spiritually, poverty, poor. Take my mercy, the king's mercy, and put it on him. Talking about this in Ephesians, Paul writes it this way to a church. He says, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. Nowhere does the Bible say forgive someone just because you can. Nowhere does God look at you and say, you just need to forgive that person. Just do it. Find the strength within yourself to do that. Ever. The Bible always says that there is a mercy accessible to you. There is an account on which you can put the wrong. It's not yours. You don't have to pay for it, but they don't have to pay for it either. What if we let God do it? You say real love relies on the richness of God to repay the debt. So what love does is it looks at somebody and says, hey, I'm not going to hold you to that account. I may not trust you. By the way, you don't have access in my life again. There are real consequences, and I can't forget that. But every time it comes up, I'm going to begin to engage a habit of putting it on God's account, not mine, not yours. I'm going to take the mercy and the love that I have experienced, extend it to you, which begs the question, have you actually encountered that type of mercy? Right, that's what the scripture is aiming at here. Okay, if we've encountered, if followers of Jesus have said, I have met a real love and a real rich mercy, can I rely upon that? Like imagine if we went out to eat. Right? Imagine if we went to a really, really rich, like just well-to-do restaurant. Like I just found some pictures of what I think expensive restaurants look like, right? Because if I walk in and it looks like this, I just leave. That's how it is. Right. This is in the notes and I'm already over time, but I was in a restaurant with a buddy of mine and he was like, hey, the up top is really fancy and the downstairs like a tavern. So we're going to go eat at the tavern. I'm like, right. That's what we're going to do. Right. And so we walk in and I didn't know you walk into the upstairs. And I was like, yo, if this is a tavern, like I don't even know what upstairs looks like. Right. Because everything looked like this. And he's like, oh, no, we're going downstairs. I'm like, oh, thank God, right? Thank you so much, because I was wearing flip-flops, of course, totally underdressed. But if we walk into a place like this, right, and if you have already said, I'm picking up the check, how are you listening to me order? Very, very apprehensively, right? I'll take the lobster. You're like, oh. And I'll have a steak. Uh-oh. Right, you start doing, can I do dishes? Is that only in the movies, right? Like, do they take a credit card? Is there a traveler's? I don't know, like, can I go rob a bank? Because you start thinking through the list and going, whatever you order, I have to pay for. Listen, but what if your company was picking up the tab? Get whatever you want. I'll have the lobster. Make that 2. right? I'll have the filet. It looked good. I think that's a good choice, right? Why? Because it's not your account. Now, I do not think that followers of Jesus interact with one another and others that joyfully all the time when it comes to offense, right? You offended me. That's great. I'll take 2. That's not how that works, right? But you understand, right? You understand, like we understand that there's a difference when someone else pays for it. And that's all the Bible is saying. The Bible is saying that there is a difference in your life when it comes to love because someone else picked up the tab. And it's not just the tab for dinner, it's the tab for the entire universe and the world. That the good news is that Jesus comes and dies on a cross. And here's what he said: I will bear the cost for what's broken. I'll do it. I'll pick up the tab so that you don't have to look at others in your life and charge them for the rest of your life. And so that you yourself don't have to constantly go through the guilt of rehearsing whatever it is you did wrong and you're trying to repay to other people. Jesus goes, give it to me. I'll pay for it. In fact, Colossians says this, and you who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with Jesus, having forgiven us all our trespasses by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside. What did he do with it? He nailed it to a cross, right? That's why people say that the ground is level at the foot of the cross, because nobody gets to stand up and go, I'm picking up the tab. And Paul looks at me and you and he goes, love keeps no record of accounts. And so as the band comes up, I just wonder this morning if unfairly you just happened to show up on a day where we're talking about something that's very, very real. And I didn't know you were coming, and you didn't know what we were talking about, but maybe God did. Right? And we love to sing about love. We love to think about love, but you know what the hardest thing is to do? It's to live it. And I don't even think it's possible without Jesus. And so maybe some of you are here and you're in prison, like the parable talked about. You're in jail. And it's not necessarily a prison of stuff or debtor's prison. It's a prison of a person. Because for most of your life, you're thinking about who that is and what they did and the account. And it just eats at you and eats at you and eats at you. And they may be living their best life, not even knowing it. And you're just watching it on social media and you're going, how could they? And you're having a whole dialogue in their life. And the only person you're locking away is you. It's you. The good news is that the mercy of God is sufficient for the worst of humanity. Would you let him pick it up? Look, this isn't about obedience necessarily. This is about freedom. Jesus says, I'll take it. I'll pay for it. And by the way, that's not just a now thing. That's a now going forward thing. It's not a forget it thing. Thank God he forgets our sin. That's how he talks about it, but we remember. And so because of that, we need someone who forgets sin, because we can't. Right? Some of you, you're here, and it's not that you're in prison. You're here, and God's talking to you about a score that you keep trying to settle. I just simply say, you have a choice. Can we recognize that you have a choice? You can either try to settle it, or you can let him settle it. Because the Bible says he will, one day, in reality, that all things that are been done in the name of injustice will be settled justly by him. And can I tell you a secret that's not a secret? He's way better at settling the score than you and me. He is. So maybe we let him settle it. And if you're here and you're going, you don't understand, that person hurt me and I'm not sure I'm ever going to be whole. The truth of it is they are never going to be able to give you wholeness. They aren't. They can't do that. People cannot grant you wholeness. They're incapable of doing it. But there is a God who can begin to repair the hurt if you let him. For some of you, you're going, like, man, talking about canceling a debt, I don't know if I can cancel a debt on someone's account. Like, do you understand the struggle it is for even me to have this conversation right now? Here's what I would simply say to you, and I hope you hear this encouragingly. That struggling to forgive is actually the start of forgiveness. Right? It's the start. It's not everything. It's not the end by any means. But if you're going, man, I don't know, that's difficult. I actually think that's God starting to turn like the engine over a little bit in your heart to crank it, to get it to go. I think he's really good at reviving hard and dead hearts. Love keeps no record of wrong. So, Father, I just pray this morning that we'd recognize the fact that you've already done that with us. And you didn't just do that, as we said, for us individually. You've done that for the entire universe in Jesus, for those who willingly come to him. And so, Father, Lord, I pray that this is real. I just recognize the fact that there's no light conversation about forgiveness. Lord, and whether that's a relationship in a marriage or a friendship where it's just little things that have built up over time. Lord, would you give us the grace to let you bear it? Lord, and in a gathering of this size, there's real, significant, historic pain and wrong. And Lord, I pray that you would even just start the habit in our hearts there. God, we love you. We thank you for Jesus. And we still have our heads bowed and our eyes closed. Let me say two things. One, maybe you don't know the mercy of God. And you didn't think that there's somebody who would ever bear the cost of what you've done against him or other people. That's why Jesus came. And he offers us his life if we just simply recognize our wrong and run to him. So maybe you're doing that this morning. And the second thing is maybe you're here and you need to pray with somebody else, and you need to have someone else pray because you don't have the words and you can't do it. Today, that's possible on the left-hand side of the room. As we worship and we sing, no one's going to look, no one pays attention. It's just there if you need somebody else. We have people prepared and trained and ready to pray with you. Father, I just pray that you change our hearts and teach us how to love. It's in your name we pray. Amen.